the story is that he used the castles that surrounded Dundalk and the walls. But that would have been just for a foundation for it, because there would never have been enough of them to build it. I'd say parts of it were probably very marshy and he had to get stone for a foundation. But it's thrown up from mud and silt on either side of it. If you walk it, you can see where it was dug up either side and just thrown up from sand and mud. That's all it is.
I would not like to call it Lord Limerick's rampart, because I don't think he owned it. He used the money he got from the Irish government of the time, faulty and all as it was, to build it, and then used it to improve his own land behind it. There was a plan by the old harbour commissioners to create some sort of lock gates there and link it to the land on the far side.
No, I'll tell you about flooding. It will come, I think, eventually. When I worked, during the winter, every winter, the quay used to cover 3 or 4 times the floods, big seas. It was always a problem. The quay was covered at one time with a metre of water. We always had floods. There was a flood, that big flood I'm talking about. It was 3 foot above the quay. It didn't cover this road. It came on, the whole area in front was flooded. And the road up here, up the road a bit, was flooded. It was an accumulation of heavy snow that suddenly thawed and flooded the river down, and then there was a southwesterly storms on the south of England, pushed the seas up the Irish Sea like a funnel, and then pushed them into Dundalk Bay like a funnel. And that, combined with the thawed water coming down, and with a predicted high tide, just all combined it into it was probably 6.5 metres high, 6.62 to cover the quay. So that's roughly what it was.
Even if you've lived in Dundalk your whole life, there's a very good chance you've never heard of the Lord Limerick Embankment. It may then surprise you to hear that it is the only thing standing between the Irish Sea and several thousand acres of Dundalk town. And furthermore, that it's crumbling. The Lord Limerick Embankment got its name from local environmental lobbyists who sought unsuccessfully to have urgent repair and upgrade works carried out by Louth County Council over the course of several recent decades. It was named for the man who built it almost 3 centuries beforehand, the mysterious and self-styled Lord Limerick. My name is Tara Tyne, and in the second of this 2-part documentary, I will explore some of the previous visions and obstacles for this vital piece of infrastructure thus far, as well as speaking to a Met Éireann flood expert and to local residents, both past and present, about their experiences of living and working in the catchment area of Dundalk's weakest link. In part 1, we looked at the story of James Hamilton, aka the Lord Limerick, and we saw how he impacted the topography of the town and created some of its most unique features in an effort to increase his own land and holdings. We also heard from Emma Coffey during her stint as chairperson of Louth County Council about the money which has been currently set aside for repair and upgrade works in the area. I decided to ask Councillor Coffey about one of the most frequently cited obstacles to carrying out works on the embankment in the past. That's the fact that the 4,000 hectares of salt marsh and mudflats, which extend eastwards from the Dundalk coastline, are actually a European designated special area of conservation, which contains several unusual and rare species.
It's a protected area and it's an area of outstanding natural beauty, and I don't think people actually realise what the flora, the fauna and the wildlife we actually have in Dundalk Bay. Many people look out there, but we've protected mosses, believe it or not, heathers, insects there that are you wouldn't get just anywhere, and obviously the birds. I mean, you'll have migrant birds that come as far as Africa and Canada that come there. We have wild geese that come there, Canadian geese that come there. It's just every day is a different day when you walk down near I call it the Navy Bank in the marshes. It's just a different day, and it's wonderful that we have it. And I suppose I'm banging a broken drum, and many before me have said that we haven't done enough with it. It's the best kept secret in Dundalk town as far as I'm concerned, and it's something that we can really, I suppose, protect and capitalise on in a very holistic way.
I also had a chat with a man who has been trying to negotiate the environmental obstacles, among others, and lobbying the town and county councils to fix and improve the embankment for over 20 years. Ex-champion boxer John Conway moved to Dundalk 50 years ago and began regularly utilising public right-of-way by walking along the top of the largely forgotten Lord Limerick Embankment and across the low tide to Bellurgan Point.
Well, I came to Dundalk in 1970 and I got my bearings fairly quickly and quickly found the Navy Bank because it was near where we bought the pub and lived in Quay Street. A lot of our customers were old salts and people who worked in the harbour, loading and unloading ships. So I began by walking the Navy Bank, and when I got to the end of the Navy Bank, I saw that there was a place which I was told by the old salts was the site of Dundalk's former shipyard, which apparently had been put there as lately as 1865 and had been used for shipbuilding up until about 1935. I then walked further round the high water mark and came to the beginning of what we now know to be the Lord Limerick Embankment, but it was called the Black Rock Embankment by the boys, and they called the area where it began the Gut, because the little rivulets of tide going in and coming out looked like intestines, I gather. So I walked the Lord Limerick Embankment as far as the Loakers in Black Rock, and that is a walk which I have carried out hundreds of times since, and I still really enjoy it, but it has become more of a hike than a walk because you have to climb over briars and through nettles and over whin bushes, and it's almost impassable. Very early on, I walked it with a fairly full tide, not a spring, a high water spring tide, but a high, what was, I think, an 18 or 19 foot tide then. The harbour level was at about 21 feet. So if you had an extraordinary high surge, which I have seen on 2 or 3 occasions since I came to town, the harbour could be as much as a foot deep in front of the spirit store. On the actual harbour, it would be over your Wellingtons. On that occasion, that was, I think, 1983, the year that the unfortunate late Eric McKeown was drowned in a high flood tide. But that tide broke through the Lord Limerick Embankment in a few places, and I walked it around that time now, and it was almost, dare I say it, a scary experience. And if the tide had risen by another 1 to 2 feet, there have been large areas of Dundalk town, like Muirhevnamor, for example, inundated. But I have mountain climbed actually the embankment mainly for the purpose of preserving my right as a member of the public to do so, to walk that walk. That is a public walk, a public right of way across privately owned property, and I like to see that that right is maintained by being exercised. So whatever about anybody else, and there may be other people doing it, but whatever about anyone else, I'm exercising that right, my right as a member of the public, to walk the Lord Limerick Embankment to the Loakers from the outfall of the Blackwater River.
I asked John about his previous attempts to compel the council into collaborating with local groups in order to repair the embankment, and about what he'd like to see happen to it in the future.
I was a founding member of Crumbling, and I was a member of an organisation called the Combined Tenants and Residents Associations of Dundalk. I had the honour to be chairman of that for on 2 different years, and what we were trying to do as a town-wide community was do the stuff that the council didn't seem to have the manpower to do. We joined up with social employment schemes, SES they were called at the time, and got funding for materials to do work, particularly along the embankment. The CTARA did a big job while I was there before it had to fold up under pressure from the town council management. We have one coastal walkway in Dundalk. The Navy Bank is very civilised and highly usable and highly used, and it's almost 2 kilometres long. And ever since 1972, 73, I have always wanted to see was it extended to Tuberona west from one end and extended to Blackrock south from the other end. Very simple proposition and eminently doable. And as far as I'm concerned, it's if you've ever gone down to the Soldiers' Point and climbed onto the Lord Limerick Embankment and struggled across it a bit, the ambience is amazing. It's something to which the people of the town definitely deserve access. And as far as I'm concerned, we employ people to identify infrastructure that we need, recreational among residential and everything else, infrastructure, and provided for us with the money that we pay as taxes. And it's not being done. And in fact, paradoxically, the opposite seems to be being done, because it seems to be about prevention rather than provision. If you live in Carrickmacross, you can go down to the water on a boat anytime you want. In Carrickmacross, you can go to one of the local lakes. You have a choice of lakes, choice of launching places. If you live in Crossmaglen, you can go into Loch Ross, or you can go into the complex of lakes in Castleblaney. There's a launching facility there. But if you live in the seaside town known as Dundalk, you have no access to the water, because you have to be prepared to struggle across 100 or to 200 metres of soft mud to get to the water when the tide's out. And if you launch when the tide's in and you come back when the tide's out, you're stranded.
Seemingly stranded in a sea of expensive surveys and broken promises by successive councils, Dundalk's potential flood damages have meanwhile been estimated by RPS Consultancy for the Office of Public Works as recently as 2017 at over €750 million. I wanted to ask former Town Councillor Eamonn O'Boyle about his own experiences of trying to get work started on the embankment.
When I raised the issue that Pádraig Kerr had brought to my attention, the engineer, that they said that the Lord Limerick Embankment was at serious risk of being washed away. And that was way back in December 2009. I asked that at the council meeting, we had a council meeting following just shortly after that his email would be addressed, what the content of it, that we'd discuss it as members. And because at the council meetings, we'd have the town engineer, we'd have the county manager, we'd have all the planning people, all the experts that we have here, that I thought that that would be willing to have an open discussion on the concerns if something like 3,500 homes in our vicinity could be covered with water or destroyed, that it was an urgent matter and it was kind of brushed under the carpet. I got the feeling that it wasn't on the agenda, it couldn't be addressed. So I put in a notice of motion about it, because one of the things that annoyed me was that we had something like 7 or 8 very expensive reports done over 10 years, from about 2000. We spent well over £1 million, which if it was spent wisely, we could have repaired the Lord Limerick Embankment. And I was amazed that we had spent well over £1 million. We had various consultancies reports provided from Kirk McClure Morton, RSP, Royal Haskiny, Tobins, Indicon, Buchanan's, Ferguson McElwee, and a whole host of others. All these reports, again, how to defend Dundalk from the idea of coastal flooding and so forth. And there was no great appetite to pursue the matter as far as I could see. I used to get annoyed with this. They thought I was kind of some harebrain that was trying to say something that this was irrelevant. And we're seeing it as coming closer and closer, that people's homes and people's livelihoods and people's lives are put at risk. And I think they've forgotten the fact that a guy called Eric McKeown, in I think it was October 1981, was out and looking after cattle, and the tide was about 2 feet deep, and he was washed away. And he died as a result. I think in around 2002 there was something like 1.24 million pounds or euros made available in the budget to do the Lord Limerick Embankment and to improve that. And that was washed away as well. It never happened. It whittled away. So to me, I just said there's an indifference, there's a lack of urgency, there's a lack of concern. It seems to me people paid their fines, they paid their rates, they paid all the charges for one thing and another. and yet the money. That essential things like protection of the life and safety of people to me is being ignored, and it just galled me, and they saw me as some kind of a troublemaker in that sense. So he had to be got rid of.
So as more consultants draw up more surveys, the tide rises higher still on Dundalk Bay, and I decided it was time to speak to an expert. I got in contact with Rosemary Lawler, an engineer with Met Éireann, who has co-authored multiple studies carried out in Dundalk Bay. I wanted to hear her thoughts on the Lord Limerick Embankment and its future, as well as the kinds of contributing factors which could lead to a sea swell and severe flooding in the town.
I've worked in flood relief for the last 20 years. And prior to starting in Met Éireann, I worked for the OPW, and I carried out a study in Dundalk Bay. So I know all about the embankments in the town and the lovely long-lying beaches that consist of Dundalk Bay and Giles's Quay and that kind of area as well, and how the sea interacts in that area.
So you'd also be familiar with the Lord Limerick Embankment?
Yes, it's a key part of keeping the water out in Dundalk.
Can you tell us what kinds of flooding events have Met Éireann been recording in Ireland, especially on the East Coast?
Met Éireann have only really started looking into flooding in the last 4 or 5 years. But since 2000, there's been a number of storm events that have affected the east side of the coast really badly. The worst kind of event was in 2009, but in terms of coastal. But in 2012 and 2013, there was an awful lot of supermoons. The tidal flooding and coastal flooding is caused by a number of key elements. One thing you have to look out for is the moon. So if it's windy and there's a full moon, the chances are you might get a flood. And every 30 years, there's this supermoon. NASA have done research and timing and stuff into that. And the last time this occurred in Ireland was in 2012, 2013. This year, we'd say we've had 2 supermoons. But in one period in 2012, 2013, we had 6 supermoons over a 2-month period. So high tides. So if you get that kind of just astronomical tides caused by the gravitational pull of the moon, it doesn't matter what the weather is, but if you have them, you can get flooding. In Dundalk, it's particularly low-lying, and if the embankment wasn't there, the whole town would have been flooded. But luckily, it is there. And if you get any dangerous kind of weather and easterly winds into Dundalk, you can also end up in trouble. And I understand that the OPW, in terms of coastal, there's 3 massive schemes, and one of them is Dundalk because of the risk of coastal flooding in Dundalk. Dundalk, Tralee and Shannon are the 3 biggest coastal flood risk areas outside of the major cities in Ireland. And it's just if the winds hit a certain way and a storm comes in from a certain direction, that's what causes coastal flooding. Luckily for Dundalk, most of our winds are westerly, so it's the west coast that gets the flooding. But the odd time we do get a strange easterly type scenario, such as the beast from the east. But in turn, if that coincides with a supermoon or a spring moon, like a full moon, and we get a storm event coming from the east, Dundalk would be in big trouble.
I asked Rosemary, in her opinion, as an engineer and flood expert, what kinds of solutions she might envisage for Dundalk Bay and the Lord Limerick Embankment.
In the case of Dundalk, there's all this new climate change adaptability things you can do in the marine environment. So you could actually build a structure out into the bay a bit further rather than disturb what's there. And that could calm the waters down and reduce the flood levels and cause the flooding to move out further to the sea. In a number of cases, as far as I'm aware, the OPW have looked at doing joint public amenities with embankments. So they have actually put footpaths and cycleways along embankments. An example of this would be the Dodder in Dublin, the River Dodder in and around the south side of the city. And they have embankments in this that are actually cycleways and pathways as well. So there is like an element where the local authorities can put flood relief schemes in with public grant projects and put it all together. So you can get a public amenity out of it. Years ago, I worked on a flood study in Drumcondra. And if you've ever gone up to an All-Ireland match, there's Fagan's Pub in the middle of Drumcondra, and there's a park. And what we did was we put embankments into the park that are used. So the park is actually where the water goes. We didn't build a new area. We just put embankments back in, put a new pathway there. And the park is used as amenity during the rest of the year, but for the flooding, it stops it off. And the same was done in Dunboyne in County Meath. They have a playground in a park and they have the flood embankments there. So rather than just building a big pond that had tiny bit of water in now and then. It just, when it gets to a critical level, it floods out. Okay, the park's out of inaction for a week or two, but the rest of the time, when you haven't got flooding, you've got a nice public amenity. And the maintenance of the park ties into the maintenance of the flood release scheme. So you're killing two birds with one stone. And it's a really good investment from a local authority and the state if they do something like that. So should be no reason that the public in Dundalk shouldn't be looking for things like that from the OPW, in my opinion.
Now that I'd heard supermoons and easterly winds identified as the biggest immediate threat to Dundalk's position above sea level, apart from the gaping holes in the clay of our crumbling centuries-old flood barrier, I wanted to give the last word to the residents of the flood catchment area on their experiences of living near the Lord Limerick Embankment and about their own hopes for its future.
Digging in the garden, when I get down more than about 6 inches, I start coming to seashells that sort of break up in your hand, and they just go away to dust. Couch grass or marsh grass, as it's called, I think. Back and front garden. I looked up this plant here, this one with the lovely yellow flowers on. What's it called? Marsh cress. It's actually edible. Yeah, I haven't tried it yet, because I just love it. All the wildlife, all the birds, and yeah, I think the walkway would be great if it's done, sympathetically with the surroundings. That would be lovely. I've got MS, amongst other things, and I don't drive. I like to be able to get out and walk as much as I can. Yeah, I know I could walk to Blackrock if I wanted to, but I don't even know if there's pavement all the way. It seems like quite a dangerous thing. I know I do get taxis out there sometimes because I don't have a car, and it's a really busy road, that. So I'd be taking my life in my hands. I like to look over at the mountains and you can see the sunshine and the shadow cast by the clouds as they go over, It's just beautiful. I love it down there.
I knew it was reclaimed land, and I know when, my dad dug down, you'd find sands and seashells and stuff in the garden, and you could go the whole way to Blackrock along the embankment there. And so we did that a couple of times, but we weren't supposed to, so we didn't tell the parents. I remember catching crabs and stuff like there, and none of us could swim. So I think that was more what they were worried about rather than us, gallivanting around the place. I remember the river behind the house coming up over the fields. Yeah, the Coast Guards got flooded. I remember that when I was really little, and the tide came right up there. A walkway would be great, because there's a lot of houses down there now, so that'll be a good walk the whole way to Blackrock.
Seagulls, and there's also a lot of crows. Sometimes, occasionally, I can see fish and swans, but the fishes are a little rarer than the swans. The only seals that I've actually seen are I think in the Navy Bank, like the longer Navy Bank, long Navy Bank walk. I think I've seen seals all the way on the other side of the river when you're going along the Navy Bank walk. I think I've seen seals there. I like to spend time around the water. I like wildlife more than the city.
It's good. We used it all through lockdown. So anytime the kids were a bit restless or whatever, we just did the walk. We went all the way around. And it was nice because the river's always changing because it's tidal. So you can catch the water birds 1 minute, and then the next minute, it's full and you can see the sky reflected in and everything. I used to work as a leader in a wildlife camp at the marshes in California, and a lot of the birds are the same. So you'd get the sort of terns and herons and egrets and things. But there are a few that I don't know yet, so I like the signs up there that tell me what they are so I can try and remember. I think we've been here 11 or 12 years. We were very lucky. Broughton Street, just there, floods on the other side of the street. But we don't get it here yet. When we moved in here, I was like, this looks like a river. Like, what is going on? You see how black the soil is? That's all river sediment. It's great for grass and that, but not for veggies. We're moving away from here because this is going to be underwater. This all used to be landfill. The sea came right up to the wall of the Green Church, and it's going back that way. So this is not a long-term place. We love it to bits, but we can't stay here forever, and we know that. I've been searching the flood maps when we look for houses. We won't buy in a place that's going to be underwater, in 2050 or whatever. So.
There's an old Dundalk joke that anybody born in the marshes are born with webbed feet. I can say that because I've lived there most of my life. I mean, there has to be a possibility that wildlife can be maintained and actually maybe even improved. Local history is not about the laws or anything that's passed. It's about people who lived at the time and what they saw and how they felt about it.
Thanks again to my interviewees for their contributions in part 2. Thanks also to Dundalk FM for their assistance in making this documentary. This programme was partially funded by the BAI under the Sound and Vision Initiative. High Tide in Dundalk Bay was produced and presented by myself, Tara Tyne. With sound recording by David Bellew.